We finally got a good look at Avowed, Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming fantasy action RPG, and I have to say, the game is looking great. We've been longtime fans of Obsidian Entertainment, the studio behind interesting recent titles like Outer Worlds, the wacky space RPG, and Grounded, the Honey I Shrunk the Kids inspired co-op survival game. The studio just isn't afraid to take risks, as proven by their most recent game, Pentiment, a historical narrative-driven game that focused on character development, heavily stylized art, and choice-driven storytelling. I think all of those games have been leading the team towards Avowed, a true high fantasy game with swords, guns, magic, and choice-based decision-making that Obsidian is known for. Now, first and foremost, we learn a bit more about the story and the context around our character's adventure. Avowed takes us to the heart of the Living Lands, a frontier at the edge of the known world. The world of Yora has been overrun by a mysterious spiritual plague, and it's our job to cleanse the world, but also discover the secrets at the heart of the Living Lands. One thing I picked up on almost immediately from the showcase was just how vibrant the world looks to be. Again, this is right in Obsidian's wheelhouse and really does help the game stand apart from the more dark fantasy worlds such as those in Elden Ring, The Witcher 3, or even Capcom's upcoming game, Dragon's Dogma 2. This is going to strike some people as cartoony, but I personally love the vibrant aesthetic, which I think gives the team a lot more flexibility when it comes to the design. We saw a lot of variety throughout the gameplay trailer, including overgrown caverns and ruins, untamed valleys, luxuriant forests, volcanic wastes, and arid wastelands dotted with idyllic oases. I think it's also safe to assume we'll see a number of other classic fantasy environments, such as snow-covered mountains and boggy marshes. It's clear that the world itself is just as much a part of the story as the characters will meet along the way, and that's something that I think will ultimately elevate the experience. Now, once we were done taking in some of the game's vistas, the developers spent a good amount of time talking about questing and how choice will be at the center of the player experience. Whenever a developer talks about choice, I get a little worried because very rarely does it ever amount to anything interesting. We've all watched trailers that promised deep and meaningful choice that shapes the world long term, and quite honestly, very few games have ever lived up to that level of hype. Avowed certainly talked up the player's ability to make choices, but then followed up with how that will actually work. We got to walk through one of the side quests in Shatterscarp, where we'll investigate the deaths of several soldiers. You'll explore the area, collecting tokens off the dead soldiers, and eventually run into an NPC that claims they got separated from the group. It's up to you, the player, to determine if they're lying or not. Whether you choose to believe that character or not will then result in a different response, and this will play out when you return to town in that area. Now, good on Obsidian to put their money where their mouth is, because that's a well-measured approach to how I would imagine choice in a game like this plays out. Does it fundamentally change the very fabric of time and space within the world? No, that's ridiculous, but your decision certainly seems to have a ripple effect within the world. Needless to say, I am excited to learn much more about this system ahead of launch and hope the team shows off just a few more examples of how varied the questing will be. That's another aspect of the game I'm keen to learn more about. This is all well and good, but what the team spent a majority of the time talking about and showing off was the combat. What's clear, at least at this stage in the game's development, is that combat is shaping up to be the best version of Obsidian's first-person action combat to date. It's much more fluid than anything the team has previously released, and some of these supporting systems really emphasize that, particularly the ability to quickly swap between different loadouts. The developers showed off a number of different weapon combinations, which included melee, ranged, black powder, and even some unique matchups I don't think I've ever seen in a game before, such as dual wands. It seems like a central theme of the game is to give players near endless flexibility. You want to use a pistol and a shield? Why not? Now, just so we cover all the bases here, we also saw one-handed wands, two-handed axes, flintlock pistols in both the single and dual-wield varieties, shields, one-handed swords, and a few different bows. Overall, not wildly out there, at least at a foundational level, but I'm sure there will be plenty of unique items that change the nature of the action. From what I see, the goal is to give players the tools to combat the myriad of enemies that they'll face, and when you look at the customization and flexibility of not only an individual loadout, but multiple loadouts you can swap around on the fly, well then that's a pretty cool concept. Avowed's combat system is going to be crucial to get right, because it's going to be the one system most broadly experienced by players, and thus the most scrutinized. I think the key is not only the flexibility, but also the execution of the action. Are we simply hacking and slashing our way through enemies, or are there abilities and real-time decisions we need to make during the action to counter and outmaneuver our enemies? If Obsidian can find a way to create an intricate and nuanced combat system that's easily accessible with a high skill ceiling, I think it'll end up winning over a ton of fans. While fleeting, we also saw some of the special abilities most likely tied to the weapons themselves that players will have access to. It wasn't a great look, but it did give us an idea of what to expect. Tanglefoot allows players to root enemies in place, giving you some battlefield control when confronting groups of enemies or particularly tough enemies. We also saw a unique dash ability while a player was holding a sword and shield. The player dashed at the enemy, dealing damage and knocking them back. We also noticed a freezing effect while a player was using a wand. This could just be a passive effect on the wand itself and not a special ability, but it did freeze the enemy solid, and when followed up with an offhand attack, completely shattered the target. Of course, none of these weapons would matter without interesting enemies to use them against, and while I alluded to it before, I think it's worth taking a look at some of the types of enemies revealed in the Avowed trailer. Some enemies are extremely durable, with large shields, and even look to possess some ability to parry our own attacks. Of course, there are also large, hulking brute-type enemies that focus all their aggression and rage into feral attacks, and then, as we saw multiple times, there are enemies that use less direct ways of attacking, including support enemies that have access to buffs, healing abilities, and of course those that support all of the minions we'll be cutting down. As many of you know, it's rarely a singular enemy that ends up being a problem in combat, but more often a combination of really well-designed enemies, and if their skills synergize together well, that's another element of the combat that will hopefully help Avowed stand apart. So the truth is, this was just a taste of what Avowed will eventually bring to the table. It's a good look, but far from a complete one, and while 2024 looks to be the year we finally get to jump into the game, we're still a ways off from a full release. We did learn that Avowed is set to release this fall during 2024, so the window of opportunity has been identified, but we are still months away from that fateful day, and a concrete date has still yet to be set. With that being said, if you're a fan of games like Skyrim and Fallout New Vegas, another Obsidian game, then keep an eye on Avowed because I think it'll be right up your alley. Our channel, Legacy Gaming, will be covering Avowed from day one, so if you want to follow along as we take you through the game top to bottom with guides, tips and tricks, and all the things you've come to know and love about our channel, then drop us a like and consider subscribing. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.